we're running a few minutes late, and we want to finish on time, if not early. So we're going to, this is really a continuation of the meeting that took place last, what was it, February 20th. We had a major presentation with the architects and Whiting Turner, and where we identified a pathway to get to the $70 million target. A potential pathway, I should say. Nothing is guaranteed. Nothing's in writing or in stone yet, but it looks like we do have a pathway to get to that target. So the plan back then on the 20th was to send the committee, the Building Construction Oversight Committee, home with that information so they could have a couple weeks to think about it, digest it, review the potential cost cuts, and come back tonight and discuss the options and answer, just discuss them, comment, answer questions. So we've got, I think we've got plenty of time for that tonight. We'll have time for some public comment and questions too later on. We could, well, first of all, let me ask the members of the committee, does anybody want to see any particular part of the presentation from the 20th? Want to go through any part of it and into any detail? Okay. So does anybody have questions or comments about what was in that presentation as far as the potential cuts and the decisions that we need to be making?
I mean, I assume we're going to go through each one of them.
Yeah, we can.
I mean,
We go through each one.
I mean, I probably have some questions about, the HVAC system. I mean, I think that's a big one that we probably will spend some time with, but we can ask them now or just when we get to it,
Yeah. Yeah. Let's just dive right in.
I mean, that seems, yeah. I mean, that seems to me, that seems to me like one that, it's going to be, in my mind, difficult to leave out. I mean, feel it in here now. And I think things are just probably going to not get better with the spring and fall. But it seems like we need some efficient HVAC, and we kind of promised that, didn't we? In the specs. So I just want to. It sounded to me like what I heard last time was we need to decide that during the build because you can't retrofit. So,
that's right.
That's a big chunk. It's an important chunk.
Yeah, the HVAC proposed cost savings was to go to a system that had better ventilation and humidity control than we have right now,
Right.
but no added cooling, and that could be a big issue. Of course, cooling costs money in the long term. It's a higher operating cost, and you have to weigh that against the comfort factor of the folks using the building. I think the number, if my memory serves, I think the value of the cooling was about
2.6.
2.6.
Yeah.
Now, this takes a little explaining, but when we made the list of cost cuts, that was, I like to think of them in terms of wholesale price versus retail price. So there, all the soft costs related to costs of construction. So overhead, all the markups, the contractor's fee, the contingencies, all that gets added back in. So a $2.6 million cooling system is really going to be about somewhere in the range of 20 to 25% more than 2.6. So in other words, all the cost cuts reflect only the cost of work, not the general conditions. So But it is a big one, and it's a big number, but it's also a big issue because, like you said, Peter, you can't go back through later on and retrofit the building with cooling. It has to be designed in early in the process. As soon as we get to design development, which we hope will be in a few weeks, we want to be designing a specific system.
So just to add a little level of detail, the top portion of the budget is cost of work, so that's the cost to actually construct. This center portion, which is general conditions and contingencies, anything you add back to the cost of work is going to increase those general conditions and those contingencies. So you can't just add this in without adding it in there as well. So it's going to impact the budget, the bottom line budget.
So just from where we stand today, just take HVAC as an example. If we were to go back to the full cooling system, where would we stand vis-a-vis our $70 million borrowing limit? I forget where we're at exactly.
In rough numbers, we'd be probably $1.5 million or $2 million over. Does that sound about right, Marty?
Because we're adding roughly 27% on top of the cost of work. I don't know if I have like a working spreadsheet.
Yeah, let me pull out a calculator here real
Well,
quick.
what is our total estimate right now? It's 60, 67, 68.
Can I just ask a clarifying
Yeah.
question? So
Yeah.
I get the soft costs and the general conditions, but if we counted on the savings for the cost of the work, there should have been an associated savings in soft costs and general conditions that come out, right? So why, when we say the cooling cost savings is 2.6 million, why wouldn't we just say the cooling cost savings is 3.3 million or whatever the number is? You know, I don't understand. Like,
Oh, why do we choose to show them that way?
Yeah.
That's a good question, and I'm trying to think of the quick answer for that one.
Okay.
I think the quick answer is that's how the Whiting-Turner's estimate was structured.
Mhm.
So we're trying to be consistent with the full SD estimate that we're working with from them.
That's fair. Yeah.
And they were asked to price all these value engineering options, and that's how they did it.
But we made adjustments to soft costs and as well as, right?
Yes, we
the
did.
Cost of the work, yeah.
Yes,
right.
we did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Right.
Just because in the much bigger spreadsheet, these are all driven based on percentages.
Right.
Or these are fixed costs.
Understood.
So when those change,
The
those get pulled out, those
percentages drop.
percentages drop automatically.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay. That all makes sense.
So right now, if we add up all the costs, as you can see, it's just under 68 million, and people will, clap their hands and say, let's do that. We've got $2 more million to spend to hit our 70. We're not necessarily encouraging that. We'd like to have that as a cushion, as a buffer. This is still very early stage. But if we add the cooling back in to this, we have to calculate about 3.3 million roughly in actual cost. So that gets us up over the $70 million mark,
By about 1.3 million. give or take.
roughly. Yep.
It's, sorry, just to add the complexity of this. It's not necessarily just adding the cooling back in. Like, we're not just adding a chiller or a cooling tower. It's two different systems.
Right.
One is a water source heat pump system, and the other is a RTU ventilation system. So you can't just, like Tom said, add it back in. Yeah.
I have a few questions about the cooling system. Which other BHS properties have air conditioning? Are the other schools generally air conditioned?
So Smith, Flynn, and Sustainability Academy, all the schools that we have geothermal in.
And do students and teachers note a difference in the quality of education or the student experience as a result of the cooling system? Like, is there a noticeable difference between those schools and the experience of schools that don't have those systems?
I'm sure there's data that definitely shows that. We don't have any internal data that shows that. Yeah.
Okay. And then the last question I have is, have you explored having cooling for part of the school building, but not in other parts, like just having one piece of the building being air conditioned, and would that have a cost savings?
So this design actually does have some cooling capability in areas such as the admin offices, and we already have cooling in, I believe, the auditorium.
When you say this, you mean the one?
So the proposed
down road. Right.
cost reduction
Sure.
includes some limited air conditioning, mostly in office areas.
What's the no cooling system? What type of system is it?
So it's a rooftop unit ventilation system with hydronics heating.
Got
So
it.
it's just bringing in outside fresh air for ventilation with no cooling capability. There is, like Tom said, there's dehumidification.
Yep.
So what that means is the unit that sits on the roof that brings in the outside fresh air in the summer months, it takes the relative humidity out of that air before it dumps it into the space, but it doesn't actually cool it, so it doesn't make it less temperature than what the outside air is.
So if the ambient air temperature outside is 80 degrees, it's going to be dumping 80-degree temperatures back into the building, but the relative humidity will be less.
Yeah.
Still like an oven.
Yeah, it's a dry heat.
Are
Could be
there
Arizona.
any rooms or classrooms in the building that don't have windows or have windows that don't open, or is it generally easy for teachers to open a
question.
window in their classroom if needed?
So we are designing, I would say, would probably say 100% of the classrooms all have exterior windows. I can't think of any that don't. The spaces that don't are things like the locker rooms. Trying to think of some of the
conference
yeah,
rooms.
some of the
Some of
conference
the
rooms.
conference.
Well, auditorium
And are they
gym
windows that
currently.
open?
In the classrooms, they're all operable. Correct. Yep.
David is calling in. Hang on a second.
Is there a scenario where we could bid cooling as an alternate of some sort, where we could sort of evaluate how it all shakes out? And maybe we get there. Is it too hard to design?
That's what we're hearing from the architect and LN Engineering. Yeah. They need a direction to move forward on the design. It's not something you can just lop off. Like I said, you can't just add a chiller. It takes a lot more elaborate design to run those pipes through the system. You know, instead of a 2-pipe system, 4-pipe system. Yeah.
Is there a way, I know it's not what your engineers would tell you to do, but is there a way to go with a design build kind of bidding route on mechanical and say, here's the performance capabilities we want, and then you don't have to design it?
I think that would be difficult in the current kind of like contract that we have with our architects and engineers right now. We did look at really at the early stages of this project, we looked at performance contracting options, and the project was so complex that it seemed like, at least at that glance, that it would be too difficult for someone, whoever would be holding that performance contract, to be able to like quantify what the savings is, given that there's so much change in the building that they probably wouldn't want to make that guarantee. It didn't seem like a really viable candidate for that option. We did that work with Commons Energy. Yeah.
David has joined the meeting by phone. Yeah, David Bohm is on the phone. We've got pretty much a full committee tonight.
Is there, just going down that same road maybe a little differently, is there a way to design a system where cooling can be added in the future?
I think it would be difficult. Like I said, it would require that additional pipe throughout the entire building. So the cost that we're trying to save, we would not be reaping those benefits. We would just be reaping the benefits of the cost
Cooling
of
tower,
the chiller or the
chiller,
cooling
right.
tower, which isn't as significant.
that big?
Once you got it all in, you might as well put that back into the project. But good question.
I'm curious to hear your perspective, Nolan. I know I was a little bit late, so maybe you've already shared that, and I'm sorry if you've done so. But do you think that do you think that the cooling and air conditioning is essential in the building for student learning?
A few thoughts on that. What's interesting is I would prefer that the rooms are cooled than the offices. Like if I had to look at it from that standpoint, I think it is essential. If you look at the beginning of the school year, it's really hot and it's a distraction. It causes students to sweat a lot, which is uncomfortable. They want to get more water breaks, which means that they're leaving the classroom. And one of the problems that you have is that opening windows doesn't really help. It's just more hot air. And the problem that we also have is bees and wasps. So when you open the windows, they can also come into the room. So, but in terms of does it affect student learning? For sure.
Your recommendation would be $3 million to include the air conditioning.
Just as we heat during the winter, it's appropriate to cool when it's hot.
I've worked in school buildings where we've added cooling to like new additions and not existing spaces, and that's like the least ideal situation. Some people in the building are comfortable, while others are sweltering. You know what I mean? So it in my opinion would be almost like an all or nothing. It's a little different adding cooling just to office spaces because they're small cramped spaces, but consistent. If one classroom doesn't have it, then they all wouldn't have it.
And also, we envision in the next 2 years having a return to real summer school for high school students. So with that being the case, we need it.
I do think that it's, like, we live in a climate where I think there are a few days in Vermont where air conditioning is really necessary, and it has a lot to do with personal preference. Some people don't like air conditioning, it's too cold, but I guess thinking about global warming, we have hotter and hotter summers, and thinking about a high school 10 years from now and having summer school could be more important to have that infrastructure.
Talking about rooms where you've got a bunch of 98-degree
That's
bodies,
true.
right? And it's not like your home where you can sweat it out by yourself,
Right.
and there's not all this other body heat radiating.
It's a good
It's a big factor.
if someone's sweaty teenager sitting next to you.
From my experience working in schools, it used to be more of a trend that we had more hotter days, like in June, where we would turn that air conditioning on, and less at the start of the school year. But that's changed considerably. Like there's like zero need to turn the AC on in June anymore, and now it's more August and September. Yes.
So if we add back the air conditioning, we're over the 70 million, is that right? So what?
Well, before we
think
go
they-
down that road, I'm curious if we could say, so we've talked a lot about that one item, but there's some other big items on the list. Are there any other, if this is the only one that people feel like is really tough to give on, then I think we start going down that road of what are the options. But I don't think it's prudent to go down that road too far and then find out we've got 4 other
Right.
big problems.
Good point.
Right.
Thank you for saying that, Nathan, because I wanted to shine a light on another cost-saving measure that is still in that critical path of needing to make the decision early and commit to it, and that's part of the interior finishes. So not carpet and paint, but the way some of the interior walls are going to be built, and that's a choice between gypboard or sheetrock versus cement block, concrete block. It's the kind of thing where it really has to be designed in. You can't go in, retrofit it later, and build walls out of concrete block, because it's all tied into the structure. So that has to be decided soon. There are other items that can be easily, as long as somebody finds the money, added later, like the auxiliary gym can be added later. The fuller renovations to Building F is a whole other project that can be added later. Those are really standalone projects. Finishing the gym floor, squeeze a few more years of life out of that. But the interior finish piece, especially the interior walls, are another big one that has to be decided sooner rather than later. Yeah, right, you'll see that block there that says reduce interior finishes.
Yep, okay.
So,
okay, got it.
the-
Yeah.
The
No,
CMU to chipboard and
missed it.
corridors and classrooms is valued at about 329,000, plus the soft costs or the markups. So that's probably closer to 475 when it's all put back in the project.
That's a very good question. Yep.
Right.
There's clearly pros and cons to every one of these things that obviously drive the operating cost.
And another big one up there is the quartz tile versus vinyl composition tile. So quartz tile or similar products that don't have, they can get dry swept and damp mopped, and that's all they need for their lifetime, and they'll last 20 or 30 years. VCT might last 100 years, but every year you're going in and stripping it and waxing it every single year, and that's very labor intensive for Marty's team.
Not only is it extremely labor intensive, as we use all of these schools for summer programming, those required needs of the building get put off because we don't have the time to do it, because the building's being used throughout the entire fiscal year.
So it has a very high long-term value, but it's also the kind of thing that's difficult to. I mean, you could upgrade it at a later date, but it wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense to put in vinyl composition tile and then rip it out and put in quartz tile when you could afford it at a later date. It's better to make the decision now.
That is another one that probably it's actually very common to bid that as a bid alternate. So
Right.
keep that option in right until bid time, and then make that decision at that point in time. Yeah.
But not the CMU, because that's
No, that's a
structural.
little harder. Yeah.
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 Can I ask a question about the quality of walls, not for upkeep, but for sound?
Yep.
Is what is more, I'm gonna say soundproof for lack of a better
Acoustic.
word. Acoustically
Yep.
sound, between the concrete and the drywall?
So you can provide acoustic treatments to the drywall and studs. This price does not include that.
Okay.
So to answer the question, the CMU definitely provides more acoustic value between two rooms than what we've priced for gyp and stud wall.
Okay. Because that's an accessibility
Yep.
question.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't.
Is there drywall in existing schools now? Is that
Yeah.
what-
Yeah, lots of schools.
The ones in Burlington schools?
Our high school has mostly block.
It is.
Yep.
Mostly block.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
All right.
It kind of seems like the CMU gyp, the quartz tile, and the HVAC are kind of we can't change this in the future very easily.
Right.
Well, that's not quite what I
Well,
heard. I mean, the
the-
flooring we can
yeah.
change. What I would say is, what are the decisions we have to make within the next, I'll say, week or two? Seems like it's the HVAC, cooling or no cooling, and it's the walls.
Right.
Whereas the flooring can come later if money's available, just like some of those other things, right? I mean, just in terms of
no,
what's...
I meant if we put vinyl tile in, we're not going to replace it for 20 years.
Well,
Fair. And probably the F building concept also. Though it could and likely will be a future project to renovate F, not included in this.
Mhm.
That would need to be decided now.
What's the plan if the committee decides that some of these elements are essential and the estimate or the project cost is over the amount that we have available from the bond? Like I think it's helpful for the committee to deliberate on these items if we understand what happens if we decide to go over the 70 million bond amount.
There's no set plan. It's a great question, and it all it means is that somebody would have to find that additional money. to close that gap.
So the next course of action would be, the recommendation of this board would be to include these items, which would exceed the bond amount, and we would go to the board with these recommendations.
And from my perspective personally, I mean, we have Noel saying that a lot of these elements are essential for student learning, and that's a high priority, yet at the same time, I don't feel comfortable supporting those pieces having a project with those elements or without the cost saving measures taken if it is going to go beyond the 70 million and there's no plan to address how that gap is going to be made up.
Well, we're determining if there's a gap at all tonight, so we haven't concentrated our energies on what that plan would be. We've actually concentrated almost a year in getting it to 68 million. So for us, without a doubt, this isn't news to us that Noel would, or anyone would ask that this would be put in. So we're going through those steps, the fundamental steps of the board's recommendation, and the next step then would be, what is that number that exceeds 70 million? And then what is our plan of action as a district and a city to be able to address the shortcomings of that? But we've spent the time to be able to get it to 68 million, and now we have spent the time to get those numbers associated with including these items into the scope of the project, with timelines, again, like, Whiting Turner and BRD has said, you have to make a decision on HVAC, AC before we go forward. And so with the third-party estimate, independent estimate coming next week, again, identifying that those are the true costs associated with if we're going above 70 million. So we are well poised to be able to determine what those costs are, to be able to then go to that next step. But the role of this, most importantly tonight, is to determine what we would be agreeing upon as a committee. The non-negotiables are the things that we feel are essential, that take us above 68. Does that make sense?
It does, and then I think that the two pieces go hand in hand in that it's hard for me to agree. I'm trying to find a way to say this. It's not a double negative, but it's hard for me to or not do a cost saving option if it means going above the 70 million and knowing that there's not really a plan to address that budget gap. If we go beyond the 70 million, I would feel comfortable adding these things back in if the school district should say, should we go over 70 million, here are the ways that we would be able to address that budget gap. But without that information, it's hard for me to support having these things back in the budget. I would have to personally say that I would think it's really important to leave all of these things out of the budget to keep it under the 70 million, because there isn't a plan for when how it would make up the gap.
Right. And that's what we're facing. The reality of our community is, we agreed to a debt policy with the city. So we, given, again, the time that we have spent, which has been great on, the advice of the Whiting Turner and our firm, our design firm, is to identify this. So I hear you, and we feel that this is the fiscally responsible plan that we brought forth. And so the next steps would be for the district, and Nate, we have talked about what it looks like. And we have already identified some costs within this budget to bring it to 68 that we have been able to potentially look at through a capital campaign, through money that went via our capital campaign funds. So we have thought of those areas. So these items are above and beyond. So the district's responsibility is, we are at 70 million. So, we would then have to present and talk to the mayor and talk about our debt policy and either talk about a capital campaign and what would that look like. But Nate, am I correct in saying, our district responsibility was to, meet the needs over the last year, of what's included, and other items that could potentially be taken away, but anything now, based on the work that we're presenting here, would have to come from additional taxpayer.
Well, I guess I would say we have a $70 million limit on what we can borrow. That doesn't mean that that's a $70 million limit on what we can spend. The question is, where do we get the money to spend more than $70 million? And there's a variety of potential answers to that question. There are some items, as we've talked about, and there may be more, where the money that we have for our long-term capital plan that we passed previously, some of that money was earmarked, small amount of it, for BHS. So there's a pool of some money. We haven't, and we put that in there intentionally because we wanted to make sure that before we got to this project up on the screen, if we had some other critical failure of a system, we had some money to use to address it. We haven't had that in a significant way, so there's some potential resources there.
How much money is that?
Do you remember exactly? 1.3?
1.7.
1.7?
We put in a new elevator of like $70,000.
Yeah.
And what we're proposing here is to do a couple of these projects out of that. That's part of what we're also doing.
Right. So there's some potential sources of money there. There's other avenues, whether it's setting aside portions of annual surpluses to use for capital investments. There's other ways we could do it. There's also going outside and privately fundraising money. I mean, there's avenues to explore, but I think to get back to kind of the main discussion here, it feels valuable to say, okay, we've talked now about HVAC, which seems like there's definitely some strong feeling that that's a piece that we really would hate to have to let go of if we could avoid it, right? Or at least for some people.
Yes.
And then there's the question that Tom raised about the walls, which again is kind of like a decision that has to be made now. So those are two items, which by my estimates are something like 3.7 million increase, which would put us maybe 1.7 over the 70 million, give or take, right? And I guess again, it's helpful for me to be like, let's make sure that there's nothing else out there, so we know whether the challenge is $1.7 million potentially, or whether it's 2, 3, whatever it could be, right? If we say, well, we don't want to make any of the changes that the architects proposed in this scenario, then we've got a much bigger challenge on our hands. So it feels to me like a good use of time just to make sure that people understand. Maybe, Tom, you want to run through them again, and just if people want to stop on one and say, let's dig in there because we're just not comfortable or we don't understand enough about it, that's probably a good use of our time.
Yeah. So the very first item is CHIPS, which stands for Collaborative for High Performance Schools. It's similar to LEAD, but it's focused on educational facilities, public education. And our original goal was to be the first school in Vermont to reach CHIPS certification. There is a cost associated with that, and there are two kinds of costs. One kind of cost is very predictable in the cost of the consultant, which is around $180,000. The other costs are the costs of compliance, and that's much harder to put a number on right now. We still think that we want to leave that as a goal in the project, and the $180,000 for the consultant is not necessary. It's a lot of money, but it's not necessarily going to make or break this project. It's not going to close any big gaps. So we're inclined to leave that in for now, and if it looks like the cost of compliance is really high, then we can make some decisions as we go down the design path and get as close to a CHIPS design and a CHIPS compliant kind of facility without necessarily getting the actual certification. A lot of colleges are doing that now with LEED. They'll have one or two buildings that are LEED certified, and then the next building they build, they decide, well, we're not going to spend $50,000 for our certification because it's just another plaque we can put on the door. But they build them to lead standards. So that's kind of the tack we're taking with chips right now. We're not throwing it out yet. It's an option on the table to back off if we need to save some money.
But there are numerous efficiencies that we are including with just the sheer magnitude of this renovation that fall under the CHIPS certification. Again, it's not just being so stringent to that. So again, we are never going after a LEED certification. It is only CHIPS, and the guidelines that we're using is our due diligence to maintain that CHIPS presence. But we are looking at those cost savings, overall.
And at this time, if we decide to cut it out completely, we have not saved all of the consultant fees because we've engaged the consultant already, and he has done some work already. So
Right.
we
But
don't
it's very
get all
nominal.
of that back.
Right, but very nominal. What we
Yeah, it's nominal. So that's where we stand with the CHIP certification. Bike parking, we're definitely going to be increasing bike parking at the facility from, I don't know, there are 30 or 40 spots now, and it'll be probably well over, I know, 75 or 80 or 100 spots when we're all done. But we were hoping to put a canopy over that, but those are expensive, and they can also be added later. It's easy enough to put out a slab and put out the bike racks and have your bike parking, and then come back later, enhance that with a cover. The student parking lot scope up there, it's hard to read from where you are probably, but it's about $400,000, and that parking lot, both levels, that's the parking lot that's on the south side of Institute Road. The substrate is shot, so just paving over that is not gonna, it's a Band-Aid fix, and it wouldn't last more than a couple years. It would cost a lot of money, and it wouldn't last. So the plan there would be to rebuild that, dig it all up, restore the substrate, and do it right, replace cracked curbs and infrastructure that has to be done. That's one of the items that could be paid for out of capital funds that have already been earmarked from the previous bond. I think it was a $19 million bond. That earmarks 1.7 for the school, for high school, and there's some of that 1.7 that's still left. Existing gym floor replacement, I touched on that earlier. Still got some life in it, and it's the kind of thing that could be budgeted out of capital improvement funds in 3 to 5 or maybe even 10 years. It might have that much life left. General funds. Or general operating maintenance funds. The bleacher replacement, that's something again that could be paid for from out of the capital, the 1.7 million that we talked about. That's something that should be done right away. They cannot be easily and safely extended and folded. It takes an army of people who are willing to lose limbs to open and close those bleachers. So they're not. It's a no-brainer. Those have to be done. They could be done as early as this summer, right? Yep. Let's see, the furniture budget, that's included in owner costs. The original pre-bond budget for furniture was about $360,000, which is pretty light. I'm sorry, it was about $300,000. And at one point in the process, we more than doubled that to $700,000, and we saw where the budget was going, and we couldn't keep that in, but we did reduce it back to $360,000, which is still 20% higher than it was pre-bond. So that some new furniture is still included in the project. It's just not. It's not going to be wholesale, all new furniture throughout the whole facility. We already talked about the walls, the CMU versus gypsum board, quartz tile versus VCT. The other item for interior finishes is the type of carpet to be used. And if you look below your feet here, this is a product called Flotex. And it's really the state of the art in high traffic institutional use. It's used in hospitals and offices a lot. Very easy to maintain, very easy to clean, easy to replace small pieces if it gets stained or cut. It's very pricey, but it's pricier than carpet tile. To save some money on interior finishes, we could go to carpet tile. It has a lot of the same characteristics. You can replace it easily, but it just doesn't wear as well. You have to replace it more often, and it's not as easy to maintain. You can speak more to the characteristics.
I think you did a good job. The biggest factor of this flooring is it has a full rubber back, so you can soak this floor with water where you can't do that with a regular carpet. You can clean it with an auto scrubber or anything like that, like you do a regular tile floor.
So that's again something that could be when we put this out, when we put the flooring out to bid, we can put it out as two different products. Give us a price for carpet tile, give us a price for Flotex or something equivalent, and then make the decision at bid time when it's time to award the work. And that's very common to do. This next one down the list is the Galleria / enlarge the B&D connector. So let's go to some photos there, or there's some drawings there. You remember the original grand plan pre-bid was to have this double height entry, and the what's now the lobby of the school would be, instead of 1 story, it'd be 2 stories, lots of light. Very grand and lots of open space, lots of light. I said that already. But it also created a way to improve some circulation in upper floors. But it was probably the single most expensive part of the building to build. And it was kind of an easy target. When we're looking at budget cuts, that was an easy target. So what's proposed now, if you see the red hatching there, that's where that Galleria space is going to be. And some of that was program space, and a lot of it was circulation space, hallway and catwalk. And so what we can do is eliminate that double height area, save that money, but still recover the program space and build it at the new connector that's going to connect B and D. And that would be a double loaded corridor with classrooms on 2 levels. So it's a much more efficient use of space, much more efficient construction cost. The line item there in this cost cut is the delta. It's the net savings of eliminating the Galleria and adding back in those classrooms at the B&D connector. Reducing F building renovations. This is a big one. It's a big dollar amount, and that would mean we would not address the lighting and the flooring. What we would address is the ADA compliant stuff, and the I think we'd still do the sprinkler, fire sprinkler NF.
No,
that would be at a
we're
later
going to do a
date. Firewall instead of the sprinkler. But that allows us to bring F building into compliance with ADA requirements immediately, and identify that whole area as a future project for a full-blown renovation as a whole separate project. We've already talked about the alternate HVAC system, with or without air conditioning. And finally, is the next big one is the auxiliary gym. Originally, that was going to be on the south side of the building, where we can't build because of soil conditions, and now it's designed to be on the east side of the building as kind of the new facade. It would stand in front of the existing auditorium. The way that's designed now, it's really easy to put that in the bid as an AdAlternate or if you want, a deduct alternate. So the bidders are bidding as, and telling us what it would cost to build that. And it also tells us what it would save not to build it. So that's another decision that can be made at the last minute. The design costs would still be absorbed by the project, and those would not be wasted, because if you decide not to build the gym now, you can go back in a few years when you raise money and build a gym with that design in hand. And again, I think we covered this earlier, but all these numbers that we're seeing on the cost savings options, these are all the costs without the markups, without the general conditions and the contingencies. So any of these savings, if you add them back into the building, you have to add about 25% on average to that cost. So what's shown as a $1.975 million savings for the auxiliary gym is really, if you added the gym back in, it's around $2.5 million, or a little over $2.5 million.
Can you explain why we presented it then in that form?
Yeah, Marty did a good job of explaining that earlier. I'll let him.
Mostly.
I didn't know if you all knew why. So.
Good, I don't want to repeat it again. I don't know if I can replicate it. I have to look it up on the TV there.
Okay, thank you for doing
There,
that.
it's fixed costs versus floating costs.
I understand. I just
So,
wanted to make sure
yeah.
everyone's heard it. Thank you. Okay, so that leaves us with these items that, again, our recommendation coming out of this meeting, having our committee members who haven't been along, for our weekly or double meetings each week for the last year, is your time to ask those questions, which you've done. Thank you. And give us your feedback so that, we've gotten to a place, myself, Kate, Keith, Marty, Nathan, we have been in these every Wednesday meeting for the entire year. We have typically a 3-hour meeting. So we've presented this and asked what we're assuming the questions that you would have had. And so we know we're not sitting here looking foolish saying we're proposing a school without AC, but we have to be able to identify those items that aren't necessarily essential, even though we believe that AC is essential, given climate change and all the variables that we know discussed and Jordan brought up. But those are big ticket item numbers that we can stand behind in taking us over the budget. All the other numbers that got us to 68 million, again, until we hear from our independent third-party estimate, which we'll get next week, we've gone through all those numbers in the line item budget of 68 million to be able to get us to the fundamentals of this short list. So we see, bike roof covers, that's something that could be fundraised for. We get it. We see the smaller items, and we understand that it is the big ticket items, the gym, and the priority being the AC first, and then the gym, as those two items that bring us over that bond amount.
Can I just ask, I imagine you've already asked these questions and delved pretty deeply into it, but some of the stuff on this list is sort of in the nice to have category, or the we could do it later and it wouldn't be that big a deal, like renovating building F. Like, we've exhausted all those kinds of things. Is that safe to say?
I think so. And it's safe to say that with the caveat, we've exhausted those kind of any other options and still maintain the goals of the project. So
Totally.
we have more net square footage than we when the project is complete, there will be more square footage than there is now. There won't be any surface left untouched in terms of the occupied space. ADA compliance is still there, energy efficiency is still there, long-term security is still there, maintenance is still there. Once we start digging deeper into trying to find cuts, then some of those items, some of those key must-haves are going to be going away.
So again, to be very clear, safety is managed, efficiency, and accessibility. So those three items were our criteria throughout any of the adjustments, and all the variables that came after the bond and over the past 9 months of probing this site, on top of the Stormwater March 2019 new act that we had to be in compliance with stormwater. All those additional things that were put into this budget and have been absorbed pushed out the AC and the gym, and that's where we are today. But yeah, the must-haves are in here, and we're waiting for any strong pushback with regards to F building, because F building, when we see the cons, the things that we're not doing, we've had those conversations leading us to the tech centers throughout Vermont, and how could we get potential funding for the tech center. And so we did make that decision, and we presented it to those committee members that aren't on our weekly, but we feel confident in that decision based on the scope of the BHS building and connecting our, again, the upgrades that will be needed for the tech center, and upgrading the efficiency of getting, to the tech center as best, but an overall campus. But that is a big item to not commit to those items in F building, but just the necessary items that have to be done.
At the risk of repeating myself, after having gone through that full list, it's going to be really challenging for me to support adding any of these items back into the scope without a clear plan from the district of how those costs beyond $70 million are going to be addressed. So if we're able to, at our next meeting, discuss here the district's plans for what happens if we go over 70 million, I think I would be more, I would better understand and be able to prioritize what gets added back into the scope. But at this time, I think the priority is keeping the costs at the level the taxpayers supported, even if that means taking out air conditioning.
I would say the one thing that if it were up to me, I'd add back now is the CMU walls, because it's a relatively small number. It doesn't put us over budget. The acoustic issues that were brought up are real. The durability issues are real. So I would add that back, and I would bid the flooring kind of upgrades as alternates, as you've suggested. And I'd love to see, like, if we could collectively we could come up with a way to put the AC back in, knowing we're going over budget, but identifying how we're going to pay for it. I think that's kind of what you're saying. The other things I think are mostly like these, gee, that'd be nice to have, but we could, we can add it later, we could fundraise for it. But that AC thing, I'm just worried we're going to be kicking ourselves down the road on that, saying, geez, why didn't we pay for this? It's going to be 30 years before it would make sense to think about this again. And
it'll be a lot cheaper in 30 years, right?
I don't see how we can build it without efficient AC. That, to me, doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, a brand new high school without AC doesn't make any sense at all to me. No, it's.
Yeah. So one thing I did want to put another wrinkle to these decisions is that with some of these things, if we're talking about finding more money, we have to figure out the most efficient path for that, because if it means a capital campaign or who knows what other any other option, it will stall the project with things like the AC, because we can't go ahead and design it until we know we have the money for it. And at this point, what we in a well, we know it's not a perfect world, but in an almost perfect world, we would like to see us be able to start design development next month. That's if we can make decisions here, if the board can make decisions, if the Board of Finance can give it their okay. We would like to proceed and start with design development next month. That allows us to put things out to bid next winter and have hard construction happening next spring. If we're not able to get design development started fairly soon, we're going to lose, we could be at risk of losing next construction season. And I don't say that to be alarmist, it's just a fact of scheduling and
Does
and
the
dollars.
district think that you'll be able to figure out how to make up costs beyond $70 million in the next month when those decisions need to be made?
What was the first part of the
Well,
question?
I think it's a question really for Nathan in that.
Well, I mean, the
like,
first question.
You're saying that we have to get moving on design development, but we can't do that until we know we have the money to do these things beyond 70 million. So it's really up to the school district to figure out how that cost is going to be made up. And are you saying that you're able to do that in the next month? Figure out how to make up the difference between whatever the cost is and the 70 million?
No, I wouldn't say it that way. I wouldn't say whatever the cost is. I mean, I'll tell you what I've heard tonight is most of the enthusiasm seems to be around putting the full air conditioning back in. And to a lesser extent, but some momentum around upgrading the walls from the reduction that was in here. So to me, what would be helpful would be, again, making sure that everyone here has kind of exhausted the discussion of all those other items so that we know what that number is and we can go to work on it, right? A $1.7 million difference between our bonding limit and the amount of money we need to build the high school we want to build for our community, I think that's achievable. $17 million difference is a different story, right? I'm using an intentionally exaggerated number to make my point, right? Because I can't tell you exactly where the line is, but what I can say is, I think it's a challenge we're equipped to handle, but I want to kind of know what the scope of that is. And so if people are like, you know what, we've said it all, those are the two pieces that we think we really need to add back in order to deliver the project that our community wants, then I think it's realistic for us to come up with a plan to achieve that. Yeah, so I would say where from what I've heard so far, yes, but I don't want to be surprised by that number growing.
I take your point.
And we didn't want to come here with a solution. We didn't want to come, it really, the narrative has to be in these, it's not baby steps anymore. That's why we're saying we're ready to take a big step, which is if this committee is recommending that, as a committee, we want AC and we're looking for 1.7 million, for us to be able to say, we've got that. We don't have it. So we weren't prepared to be able to make your lives easier and say, what is it that you want, out of this list, and we've got it taken care of. We know that we're going to get the money. We want the public to understand that we are short. We are at 68 million. Here are the next steps. We can accommodate potentially this 1.7 million overage, but by no means, to Nate's point, if we were here and you're saying, how are you making up 4 million? No idea. Who does the capital campaign to raise 1 million? Who in this room is going to be managing that campaign? Can the district, present us with some options like you're asking for? Without a doubt, but knowing what that number is, leaving this meeting, we'll all understand. We're waiting for your feedback to give us that direction. So what that number is.
If the committee signals to you, these are our two priorities, and you come back and are we able to, can we consider, would you be able to share with the committee how that cost difference will be made up before the committee makes the final decision of these are the things that we want to add back into the scope? Like, can we give you directional guidance tonight saying we'd like you to consider adding these things back into the scope, and we want to understand what you would do in order to make up that cost difference, and then at our next meeting have you come back and say, here's how we would do it, and then we say, okay, now we feel comfortable giving the final direction to the board to put those things back in.
I think that's realistic. I don't know quite what the order is here in terms of when the school board's hearing things and Board of Finance or something. So I get what you're saying. I think that is realistic, provided kind of, as Tom said, it sounds like there's a a series of events that have to happen. And so, do we need to do that, or is it our even job to do that? I don't know. I guess.
I think next steps are, we have you saw from our agenda, our school board meeting, our monthly March meeting is tomorrow night. We were going to report out, Commissioner Pillsbury and myself from the Finance and Facilities Committee, what the update from this meeting was, given that guidance and given that broad strokes of the numbers, and exactly what you just said and what Nate, Director Lavery just, communicated back is, then yes, that would be an update to the board, signaling, and the board will also give their feedback to us about, no, we want, X, Y, and Z from this list. So they'll be giving us their input, but the recommendation from this board would be to consider the interior walls and the HVAC. So that's the update. And then Board of Finance, again, we've asked to be on their schedule, but we would wait to bring those pieces together before we would go to Board of Finance. And then we would reconvene potentially earlier before that, before we wrote March 19th, before we go to Board of Finance. That make sense? Go ahead.
That's the sequence. I do want to keep an eye on time. It's 25 till 7. We did have on the agenda that we'd leave some time for public comments and questions. So,
have we given just Nathan direction?
Yes, and I can follow up.
Good.
Yeah, we'll work on it.
Well, can I just ask, I mean, I agree, but is there anybody who feels differently?
I think
Okay.
those two.
I just
Those
want to
two
make
items.
sure
Thank
that
you.
we're not just following like one person's direction.
Right.
Totally. I just have one question. On the HVAC, have we really delved deep into what the alternative options are to provide full AC? And has Whiting Turner sort of weighed in on, yeah, your engineers are right? And
It's a very thorough discussion about what our options are with the engineers, and they're still looking at possibly
with
additional
contractor
options.
input as well?
Yes, definitely with contractor input.
Do you want to, I mean,
That's a good
again,
question.
you know,
Yeah.
public, L&N, we could
Yeah,
talk about
L&N,
the
yeah.
consultant that we've worked
Yeah,
with,
no, I
and then
got
the,
that.
okay,
Yeah.
and then actual physical contractors.
Yeah.
Yeah. But to your point, because we actually, do you want to expand upon that? Because we actually went above and beyond about, another engineer,
Right.
consultant, or
What do you mean?
how we were taking L&N's, meeting with them, and then we,
That was more of a confirmation of the numbers.
okay,
That Whiting Turner gave us their estimate, that also LN took it upon themselves to have those numbers validated by actually having I can't think of the Thomas Mechanical
Yes.
validate those numbers. So that was more of confirming the numbers than it was the system. Yeah.
right. But
Yeah.
to your, because again,
Yeah.
great question, want the rest of the board to know what you're thinking, because it's not in their wheelhouse. That's why you're on the committee, because you're a builder, and again, without a doubt, great question, so thank you.
Just mindful that we are doing this SD estimate, third-party SD estimate.
Yeah.
So the numbers aren't hard.
Yeah, and I, on the meeting of the 20th, I started off the meeting saying all these numbers are still relatively soft. It's still early in the process. We're still in SD. Nothing's really been bid out yet. So that's still the case. These are soft numbers. And so we did hire a very highly regarded third-party estimating company. They work nationally. They've been in business since the early 70s. They have all the information that Whiting Turner has had over the last 6 or 8 months. They received all that information, and they're crunching numbers and returning a detailed estimate to us to compare it to what Whiting Turner came up with. Then what the next step in that process is to take the third-party estimate and Whiting Turner's estimate and reconcile them. And we literally sit down at the table together and go line by line and say, well, what were you thinking with this one, and how are those square footages correct, and did you consider that this is a different piece of equipment than what we carried? And so it's really a course of due diligence that we're doing here to really check the numbers, and there still be soft numbers because we haven't bid it yet, but it'll be more, something that we can really have a little more confidence in.
What's the timing on that?
The, our reconciliation meeting is scheduled for this week. It'll be in the middle of this week. Yeah. The third-party estimate is due soon, and we've scheduled it so the reconciliation will start right after that. And the architects and the construction manager are all on board. We have a time, 3 hours set aside on Wednesday for that.
Okay.
Maybe ask David.
David, do you have any questions yet?
No, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. I don't think I have any questions. I mean, I think it's very interesting about the third-party estimate coming in this week, and we may find ourselves in better shape. We may find ourselves in worse shape, right?
Correct.
And that may be by a minor amount that doesn't make much difference, but it may be something significant. So,
correct.
You know, talking about, I think it's great to be talking about what the next priorities are. And my general feeling is that to go ahead with this project, with this budget, if this is what it reconciles to, and then to be, maybe something for the committee and others, is then to be clear about what is the list of priority items. Because as I think about some of those priority items, you know, I think, you know, if money was raised, say, in 6 months for some priority item, would the construction have gotten along far enough that now it's going to be more costly than it might have been if we had known about that at the beginning? And can we do some planning in the construction planning so that the priorities are being kept in mind, so that if we can do something that respects that those may be done in the future, you know, we can make it easiest to include them at some point. I mean, some things like the gyms seem to stand out as that's just an add-on to the building.
Right.
Some provision would be made in the connecting wall there, but there could be other things. This air conditioning would probably just be so integral to things going on in the building that the timing of when money could be raised to do that full air conditioning would be critical. So it seems to me we really need to see where we are with this reconciliation of the budgets with the third-party work. I think that's a great thing to be doing at this point. So then we'll know much better whether we have anything extra or we don't.
Yeah.
So, but it's been a very good meeting, and you know, a tremendous amount of work has gone in so far, and I think it's been great. And it's good to see, you know, these key things that are most important right now being thought about, being put into this current plan, this current budget at SD. But just can't wait to see what the reconciliation is going to be. So.
Yeah, I mean both. One thing I wanted to add on to about the cost of delay is that right now in this country and in this region of the country, we're looking at about a 5% per year escalation rate for cost of construction. It varies from region to region, but our construction professionals are using that figure as a something to hang their hat on when they're calculating costs of construction in the near future. So if we lose a year to raise money, to raise $3.5 million for air conditioning, we've just spent $7 million. $3.5 million for the air conditioning and 5% of the construction cost. In round numbers, that's not. I mean, those are really, really rough round numbers, but that's the cost of delay is about 5% of construction costs.
Well, I'm feeling here that there really shouldn't be any delay. We should make this decision shortly in the next 2 weeks here, and make this decision and get the $70 million, $68 million, wherever we are with this reconciliation. Get the work started and move forward. It's a tremendous amount of good work to do for this facility, and why delay on it?
Right.
That's my
Thanks.
feeling.
Thanks, David.
It's also probably, I mean, who knows what's going to happen to the markets in the next few months, but this is a difficult time, I think, to fundraise, given what's happened over the past few weeks. So I think starting a capital campaign right now would be very challenging. Yep.
I would like to make sure we leave time for public comment and questions. We didn't leave as much time as I had hoped, but hopefully you're able to hear the issues and get some of the answers to your questions.
So, RETM, where would public comment, if you wanted to speak, where would the best place be? Come here to the table?
Here.
Oh, you have a microphone?
Yeah, we got a microphone. That's right.
Oh, you do? Okay, great. So Amy, Peter, Mark, welcome. Thanks for being here. Anybody?
Where do you want? Yeah, if you just want to face the board, then we're
Here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Okay, so I had one comment and two questions. The comment is, I think cooling is absolutely essential in this project. I know you said that, but it really speaks to building usability. And anybody who was on the tours leading up to the bond vote was in the building in the summer and then in the early fall, and it was, I can't imagine that as a learning environment for the kids.
Especially the guy giving the tour.
What's that?
Especially the guy giving the tour.
So I think it's absolutely critical that we find a way to cool the building, the whole building. And my second two questions, one was around F building, and I think we're just kicking the can down the road on F building a little bit. So more to Jordan's point about how are we going to pay for it later, and tangled up in that question is, wasn't there already renovation done to F building along the way, and any non-ADA renovation that we would be doing in this project, what is the lifetime before we would have to address something in a building? And you can just take these questions if you want to answer them now. And the second one was a comment on something, or a question about something Tom had indicated that we need a decision on when we would, about the kinds of things we would include in the project. If we're going to defer the second gym, would we need to understand that now, or could you just build like a wall that could be built out or broken down easily, or whatever the name is for adding through the existing building into the new building? Could you do that at some way? Would you have to do it if we decided? So could we defer that whole decision and just sort of stub it out, as it were, so that we can do it at a later time? No, I wasn't there.
I think I hear what you're saying, Mark. I'll answer the last one first, and I think Marty can answer questions about F building. As far as the gym goes, the most efficient course of action is to design it as if it's going to be built right away, so that all the infrastructure stubbing, the electrical connections, the HVAC connections, all that infrastructure can be designed and placed so that it would be easy and efficient to add the gym, the actual building, at a later date. And like we said earlier, I think if we put it into the bid package as an alternate, then we know we'll have a really good idea what that's going to cost, and maybe some angel will swoop down and say, "Oh, I'll write a check for that. I want to put my name on that gym."
So, Mark, to answer some of your questions about F building, so tech centers, as you probably know, have available to them a type of funding that's called a Perkins grant that helps them support their programming. So the tech center has inherently received funds to fit up those programmings from the Perkins grant. So theoretically, let's say you're installing a welding program, then you need to fit up that space to serve as a welding program. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing upgrades to the structure or whatnot of the facility. So the F building has inherently received upgrades to a lot of the program itself, but not the infrastructure. So not the electrical, not the HVAC, and then, or even things like the roof or windows or things of that nature.
So there's a paint booth for the auto lab, for example,
Yeah.
auto body. Yeah.
So does that maybe answer your question?
Yeah, but just in terms of the life expectancy of whatever's there now that we're not going to renovate in this project.
It's got the same age windows, same age lighting, same age flooring, same age ventilation system, same age electrical infrastructure as the rest of the high school.
So it would be good to understand when that would have to be addressed if we're talking on it now.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it will likely have to be.
A timeline.
It will likely have to be addressed at least prior to exhausting a 20-year bond for sure. Yeah.
Sure, I have a couple of thoughts. Sounds like I need to come in the center here.
Yeah, thanks.
So, I too am very supportive of air conditioning and HVAC system. This building will need to last another 50 years, and I fully expect the next 50 years it will be developed in new instruction and all of that. So I think it's very short-sighted not to think, and I actually think most people in the public think that's what they're going to be getting. So I think you'd be causing a great deal of disappointment. I appreciate the system's approach to this. I do want to just put in a plea for the students and the innovative side of learning. I'm hoping that the classrooms can still be clustered. When you're talking about the walls, I guess that's where that came up for me. Cement blocks are hard to move around, and I'm hoping there's some flexible walls, first of all, that are going in so that there can be innovative space, collaborative spaces happening, some transom windows, for instance, so that there's maximum light going in and the hallways aren't as dark as they are now. So you just be thoughtful about, you can't just put out the cement blocks because that's caused a huge problem in the high school in the last years. I would be remiss to say I'd like to check on the gym floor because in 2016 when it was last refinished, I was shown 2 spots that could never be sanded again according to the sander. And so I think maybe you are indeed on. I'm not sure there's another light to that. So I would definitely check on that, and I could show you the 2 spots if they showed you at least. The bleachers, I think, it's such a safety issue. So maybe I'll just end by saying that over the last 15 years, each year there was always some money set aside for that. Was it 1 cent a year for capital improvements, 1%? And each time it was taken away from the high school and put to other schools. So I think over the last 10 years, we're actually owed at the high school $5, $6, $7 million that had been deployed that were supposed to repair the parking lot. My last year there, we did have a car go down in a sinkhole in the student parking lot. So I think the point about substructure is important. But, you know, the rest of the stage was supposed to have been finished. The gym was supposed to have been upgraded. The bleachers were supposed to have been done. So money had been allocated but taken away because something came up at Hunt or something came up at Flint. So I think it's imperative that if you're going to do this building, you need to do it right and really think about, making it as right as possible because people won't come back over the next years. But I would certainly echo the idea about the HVAC system, just thinking through the sound. I mean, the soundproofing is huge, but make sure it's flexible walls enough so that students really want to be in the building, that it's light, it's cheery, all that kind of thing. And I guess my final question is I want to make sure I understand the comments about F building. The one accessibility issue for me that was always a stumbling block was going from D to F. And I want to make sure that a ramp or something else is going in, that little lift thing is jettisoned because that was dangerous.
Yes.
It's going to be gone. Okay, thank you. All right.
Thank you, Amy.
Can I just make a comment just at the same because everybody,
Yes.
as we're making these decisions, are aware. So you're correct on your statement, Amy, about the sanding of the gym floor. When you refinish the gym floors each year, you don't sand it, you screen it. So you screen the top layer of finish off, which doesn't take any of the wood structure. You're correct that it only has, very few, if maybe no more sanding life left in it, but it's been 20 years since we last since the previous time we sanded it, and we sanded it a few years ago. So it clearly has some life left into it. Yeah.
Please point about the CMU walls. I had the impression that we're talking about corridor to classroom walls. Is that right?
It is.
So
So not between classrooms. So you could
And
make
some,
those walls
some,
more.
some
and
between classrooms, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
But
I was
even
thinking
just-
that the corridors are sort of more critical in my
Durable.
mind for
Durability.
durability. Yeah.
And there,
And sound.
and as far as sound is concerned, it's critical between the two classrooms because of the bleeding of sound. And if you have anybody with hearing impairment,
Yeah.
it's really tough.
Yeah.
But there, I believe we
It's hard
did
to
have
get
some for like when we do the humanities to have some with accordion, but yeah, so combination.
At least hang on to the ones you have now and, we deploy them.
That building's going away.
I would
Comments,
rather
questions?
yield more time if Amy wants to keep talking. I know this building better than anyone in the room.
Yes, true.
Um,
Thanks.
I have one comment and one question. The comment is I'll agree with the AC. I think it's important we're anticipating year-round use in a facility that can't be used year-round. It doesn't make sense to pour the money in. Second is a question, I'm sure this came up a long time ago. The budget has $390,000 for a zoning permit. Are we really paying the city $390,000 for a zoning permit?
Approximately, yeah.
And another $500,000 plus for building permits?
That's
I think
what
that
they
could be
do.
bargained.
Has anybody
I think
actually
someone should take Laurel out
approached
to dinner.
zoning or the mayor and said, we're scraping for nickels here? I don't want to pay
Yes.
$1 million to zoning and planning. I can say that it's zoned properly, and I'll give you an illegal opinion on that. It's in the freaking district, I mean, right? They don't need $1 million. In trades permits, electrical, I understand. We want to see it done right. But the zoning permit, I'd rather see that money go towards the gym floor or the AC. So somebody should be asking the city if the city taxpayers really need to have the school's taxpayers shuffling pockets.
So I haven't personally engaged that specific issue, but it would be helpful. I don't know if Nathan or Tom, if you could put together a list of all the different city expenses that you're anticipating and send it to me, and the city can go through, and I would have to talk with my colleagues to understand, okay, this is something that even the city has to pay when we do a project. This is something that, and kind of legally go through and see where there's flexibility, if there is flexibility.
I mean, I get that the state's going to insist on their stormwater permit, but yeah, we're all the same taxpayers, but we're still doing the same town meeting. So if someone would follow that up, that'd be great. Thank you.
I couldn't agree with you more. My experience in the city has always been that if the street department wants a permit, they have to pay the public works department. If the parks department wants to build something, they have to buy a permit and pay the public works.
So I'm okay with that because that's a city taxpayer activity paying for a city taxpayer issue.
Right.
But if the city is going to say that the city budget is staying low by pushing costs off onto the school book and the school budget, then that's dipping into the wrong pocket. So whether they need to say, yes, we're going to insist on it and stand by it, or they need to explain how they're doing this financial legerdemain. Someone could follow it up, that'd be great. Thank you. And I really appreciate that level of detail being out there and making this stuff available, because not all of us can follow this closely, obviously, as you all can. So thank you.
Thank you.
There you go. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's 10% of it.
Thank you. Right.
You'll come next meeting, right?
Thanks.
Anyone else? I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank the board members for coming too. I appreciate that, Kathy and Steve.
Yeah, thank you, fellow board members, Commissioner Carey and Commissioner Alwell for being here. I know Commissioner Alwell had talked to me about, potential cost savings or support, and Commissioner Carey as well dedicated to this, so thanks for being present. And thank you, Noel, for being here as well, and the public. It's essential. I mean, just from those comments alone, it supports the board's work and the community partners as well, so thank you. So next steps, Tom, on the agenda?
Next step is tomorrow we do present to the school board at some point on the agenda. I'm not sure where I am on the agenda,
Yep.
but the next step after that will be to go back to the board next week, and we're reconvening this body on the 19th. With the hopes that we could take to get on the agenda for the Board of Finance for the 23rd. I've made a request. I haven't heard back from City Hall about that.
So, yep, so we're school board meeting tomorrow night presentation. I'll give the feedback we'll give the BCOC feedback from the school board. Then following the following Thursday, not next, the following is the 19th, and then Monday is the 23rd, the Board of Finance. Okay.
Right.
Great.
And Wednesday is our budget or estimate reconciliation.
Right, yeah, continually our weekly Wednesdays happen. Okay.
Yep.
Great.
And you guys don't need to come to that. That's just going to be
Great.
technical.
All right.
Good luck.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. And thank you to RETN.